The rain hadn't stopped all week. In March 1994, Seattle was soaked in that endless gray drizzle the city was known for, the kind that blurred the skyline, softened the edges of streetlights, and made every surface gleam like glass. On the evening of March 17th, 27-year-old Emily Carter stepped out of a small cafe near Pike Place Market, pulling her denim jacket tight around her shoulders. She waved goodbye to a friend, smiled, and disappeared into the misty night. It was supposed to be a quick walk to her car, just a few blocks away. She never made it home. Emily wasn't the kind of person anyone thought could vanish without a trace. She was dependable, organized, and fiercely independent, a local photographer whose work had begun to draw attention around the city. Her photographs, displayed in small galleries and coffee shops, captured Seattle's quiet corners: ferry terminals at dawn, rain-speckled windows, fishermen unloading crates on the docks. Friends often said she saw beauty in places others overlooked. She had recently started a new project, a documentary series about women navigating life in the city's art scene. And it was the first time in years she'd felt truly excited about her future. That Friday evening, she had met her friend Lisa for coffee to discuss an upcoming exhibit. They chatted until just after 8 p.m. Emily mentioned she had a late-night editing session planned at home and wanted to get an early start. She waved from the doorway as she left, the reflection of streetlights shimmering on the wet pavement. A few witnesses later recalled seeing her walking north along First Avenue, umbrella in hand. Then, nothing. When Emily didn't show up for a Saturday morning photography workshop she was scheduled to teach, her friends knew something was wrong. She was never late, never careless. By noon, calls were made to her apartment, her parents, her workplace. No one had heard from her. Her car, a blue 1989 Toyota Corolla, was still parked where she usually left it, 2 blocks from the cafe, near an alley that sloped toward the waterfront. Inside the car, detectives later found her camera bag and wallet untouched. The search began almost immediately. Posters with her photograph, smiling, brown-haired, eyes bright with confidence, were taped to telephone poles, shop windows, and bus stops. The local news ran nightly updates, showing clips of volunteers walking through industrial lots near the waterfront, combing through brush along the shoreline, and scanning parking garages. Police divers searched the cold waters of Elliott Bay. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses who had seen her get into a car, and no physical evidence beyond faint footprints leading toward a side street that ended near an abandoned warehouse. In the days that followed, Seattle's artistic community rallied around Emily's family. Friends organized vigils and distributed flyers from the University District to Ballard. The city, still adjusting to its rapid growth and new tech influx, felt smaller than a place where people noticed when someone vanished. Yet as weeks turned into months, the energy faded. Tips dried up. Theories grew darker. Some believed she had been kidnapped. Others whispered about a stalker she had mentioned to a coworker a few weeks before she disappeared, someone who had left strange notes at her gallery opening. Her parents, Tom and Grace Carter, refused to give up. They spoke to every reporter who would listen, begging for information, pleading with the public to keep Emily's face in their minds. Each year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, they gathered with friends at the pier near Pike Place to release white lilies into the water. By late 1995, the case had gone cold. Police had followed dozens of leads: a possible sighting in Tacoma, a reported scream heard near the old shipping docks, an unidentified woman's body found in Oregon that proved to be someone else. Nothing ever connected back to Emily. The warehouse where her trail had ended was torn down in 1996, replaced by a parking lot. Any trace that might have existed, fibers, prints, blood, was lost to time and development. For years, her parents kept her apartment exactly as she'd left it. The same framed photos on the wall, her darkroom equipment boxed neatly in the corner, rolls of undeveloped film stored in the refrigerator. Grace once told a local paper, "It feels like she could walk through the door any minute," but she never did. By the early 2000s, the case was officially inactive. The lead detective had retired, Evidence sat sealed in an aging cardboard box inside the Seattle Police Department's cold case storage unit. A few photographs, transcripts, some personal items, and a single swab collected from the backseat of Emily's car that no one at the time could process with the limited technology available. It was labeled Unknown Sample, Possible Trace. For decades, it remained untouched. And so, for nearly 30 years, Emily Carter's disappearance became one of Seattle's most haunting mysteries, a name locals mentioned in hushed tones whenever another missing persons case made headlines. Her story faded from the news, but not from memory. What no one could have imagined was that in 2023, nearly 3 decades later, that forgotten swab, a single, overlooked piece of evidence, would finally tell the truth about what really happened that rainy night in 1994. The investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance consumed Seattle's Major Crimes Unit through the spring and summer of 1994. Detectives canvassed the entire downtown area, questioning cab drivers, shop owners, and transient workers who frequented the alleys near the waterfront. They pored over hours of surveillance footage from nearby buildings, though in those days, cameras were rare and grainy, more static than detail. Still, they hoped for even a glimpse of Emily's last moments. None ever appeared. Detective Mark Jensen, a seasoned investigator who'd worked homicide for over a decade, was assigned as lead. He spent weeks interviewing everyone connected to Emily, coworkers, friends, even a few ex-boyfriends. One, a musician named Ryan Hale, told police that Emily had recently grown nervous about a man who had shown up at her gallery opening 2 months before she vanished. She said he'd made her uncomfortable, following her to her car afterward, leaving her cryptic notes about seeing things through her eyes. Police never identified the man. The strange notes became one of the investigation's few tangible clues. Emily had kept 3 of them, each written in block letters on unmarked white paper. You see beauty others miss. We are the same in how we watch. I'll show you what you can't photograph. The handwriting was analyzed, but without a suspect to compare it to, the lead stalled. Detectives dusted the notes for fingerprints, but in 1994, Seattle PD's forensic lab lacked the advanced DNA or trace analysis that would later become standard. The investigation grew more desperate as time passed. A tip line brought in dozens of calls, sightings, confessions, false alarms. One caller claimed to have seen a woman matching Emily's description near the ferry terminal days after she disappeared, looking disoriented. Detectives followed up, but it led nowhere. Another tip came from a long-haul trucker who believed he'd given a ride to a woman who said she was running from Seattle. But the description didn't match. By late summer, the task force was exhausted. Jensen privately admitted to a reporter, "We've hit every wall there is." Still, he refused to close the file. He had a hunch, a gut feeling that whoever had taken Emily wasn't a stranger passing through, but someone who lived nearby, someone who watched her long before that night. Then in August, a jogger in Discovery Park found something strange, a torn piece of denim fabric lodged in brush near one of the wooded trails. It looked like the corner of a jacket pocket. Detectives rushed the item to the lab. The Carters held their breath, fearing the worst. But when results came back, the fabric was too degraded to test for DNA, and no definitive link could be made to Emily. Another dead end. Months stretched into years. By 1996, the case file had grown thick with reports but thin on answers. Jensen and his team tried re-interviewing old witnesses. One recalled seeing a dark sedan idling near where Emily's car had been parked that night, possibly a late 80s Ford. Detectives traced dozens of similar vehicles registered in King County, but found nothing conclusive. Seattle itself was changing fast during those years. New construction reshaped the waterfront, tearing down the warehouse district that had once loomed over the bay. In those spaces, where evidence might have lingered, parking lots and office towers rose instead. It was as if the city had quietly paved over its own memory. By 1998, the case was officially cold. Jensen was reassigned, though he kept Emily's photo pinned above his desk, a reminder of the one case that had slipped through his fingers. Her parents still called him every Christmas, hopping for news. Each time his answer was the same: "We're still looking." The Carters became advocates for missing persons, joining statewide campaigns to improve investigative resources. They funded a small annual scholarship in Emily's name at the University of Washington for aspiring photographers. Yet behind each public appearance, their private life was marked by quiet grief. Two parents who left their porch light on every night, waiting for a knock that never came. By the mid-2000s, all that remained were fragments, a few boxes of evidence, the haunting notes, a mystery that had outlasted its urgency. In 2010, when the Seattle Police Department began digitizing old case files, Emily was among the hundreds transferred to long-term storage. Most officers working the department then hadn't even been on the force when she vanished. And so, for more than 2 decades, Emily Carter's story lived only in memory, the kind of unresolved tragedy that locals mentioned whenever another missing person alert appeared on the news. Her family aged, her friends moved on, her name faded from headlines. But in 2022, when the Cold Case Unit began reviewing unsolved files for potential DNA testing, a young detective named Maya Ortiz stumbled upon Emily's evidence box. Inside was the swab taken from her car's backseat, sealed, untouched since 1994. The label caught her eye: "Possible trace, human origin undetermined." Technology had advanced far beyond what investigators could imagine 3 decades earlier. DNA could now be extracted from fragments invisible to the naked eye, even from samples that had degraded over time. Ortiz requested that the sample be retested using modern forensic methods. No one knew it yet, but that single decision, one small act of persistence in a forgotten file room, would soon unravel one of Seattle's longest-running mysteries and bring the truth about Emily Carter's disappearance into the light. It was a quiet morning in January 2023 when Detective Maya Ortiz received an email from the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab. The subject line was simple: "Case 94217, results available." She sent the decades-old swab in for testing weeks earlier and had nearly forgotten it amid a flood of other cold case reviews. But as soon as she saw the date, her pulse quickened. She opened the report and read the summary twice. The degraded material from the backseat of Emily Carter's car had yielded a partial male DNA profile, faint but clear enough to run through CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. It wasn't a full match, but a lead. The system flagged a potential connection to a relative profile uploaded in recent years. The match wasn't direct. It came through forensic genealogy, a tool unavailable back in the 90s, but now changing cold case investigations across the country. Within days, Ortiz partnered with the department's forensic genealogist, Dr. Rachel Kim, to build a family tree based on the partial match. Using public ancestry databases, they traced connections spanning several generations, from Washington to Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. The tree pointed to one common branch: the Larson family, who had lived in the Seattle area for decades. By February, investigators had narrowed the search to a handful of male relatives who would have been in their 20s or 30s in 1994. One name stood out: Daniel Larson. He'd lived just 2 blocks from Pike Place Market that year, working as a part-time dockhand. He had no serious criminal record, just minor arrests for trespassing and disorderly conduct, but enough to make detectives pause. His employment history showed he'd abruptly left Seattle in 1995 and moved to Oregon. Ortiz pulled Daniel Larson's old driver's license photo from the archives. The grainy image showed a man with sharp features, thin lips, and a distant stare. A chill ran through her. Witnesses back in '94 had described a man loitering near Emily's gallery, tall, slender, brown hair, wearing a dark jacket. The resemblance was uncanny. Detectives began the slow process of collecting new DNA from the Larson family line. Working discreetly with Oregon authorities, they obtained a discarded coffee cup belonging to Daniel Larson from a cafe he frequented in Eugene. The sample was rushed to the lab for comparison. 2 weeks later, the results came back, a direct match. The DNA found in Emily Carter's car in 1994 belonged to Daniel Larson. Ortiz stared at the report in silence. The swab, overlooked for nearly 30 years, had finally spoken. It was irrefutable. Larson was alive, now 60 years old, working as a maintenance supervisor at a lumber facility outside Eugene. He'd lived an unremarkable life, with no wife, no children, no major legal trouble. He'd blended in perfectly, invisible to everyone except the evidence that never forgot. Detective Ortiz reopened the case formally in March 2023. She spent weeks piecing together Larson's movements in the 90s. Records showed he'd been employed at the docks, where Emily often took photographs for her projects. Several witnesses from the time recalled seeing him lingering near the piers, watching her work. One old coworker even remembered him mentioning the girl with the camera, describing her as too curious for her own good. When detectives compared that statement with the strange notes found in Emily's apartment, the connection became undeniable. The phrasing, "We are the same in how we watch," echoed Larson's own words from that era. On April 12, 2023, Seattle police and Oregon State troopers executed a quiet arrest at Larson's small rental home in Springfield. He didn't resist. When officers entered, he reportedly looked at them calmly and said, "It's about that girl, isn't it?" During interrogation, Larson initially denied knowing Emily Carter, but confronted with the DNA evidence and photos from 1994, his demeanor shifted. He admitted to having met her a few times while she photographed along the docks. He claimed they'd talked about art and light, that she'd been interested in understanding him. But as detectives pressed harder, contradictions piled up. Eventually, under mounting pressure, Larson muttered something chilling. "She shouldn't have followed me. She saw something she wasn't supposed to." Investigators believe that on the night of March 17, 1994, Emily may have encountered Larson near her car. He could have offered her a ride or approached her under the pretense of conversation. What happened next remains uncertain, but forensic analysts believe she was attacked and forced into his vehicle. From there, her trail vanished. When search teams revisited the area around Discovery Park, the same place where the torn denim was found in '94, they uncovered fragments of degraded human bone during a new sweep. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to Emily Carter. After 29 years, she had finally been found. The news broke across Seattle like a shockwave. Local stations ran live updates. Newspapers printed side-by-side photos, Emily's radiant smile from 1994 and Larson's booking photo, worn and gray-haired, his eyes cold. For those who had followed the case for decades, it was surreal. The mystery that had haunted the city for nearly 3 decades had finally come to an end. For Tom and Grace Carter, the call came on a Tuesday morning. After years of waiting, they finally heard the words they'd prayed for but dreaded at the same time. "We found her." The relief was indescribable, and yet so was the pain. In interviews that followed, Grace spoke softly, her voice steady despite the years of anguish. "We never stopped believing. The truth took 30 years, but it came." News of Daniel Larson's arrest spread through Seattle like wildfire. It was the kind of story that didn't just resurface. It reopened an old wound that the city had quietly learned to live with. By April 2023, every local channel carried the headline, "Arrest made in 1994 disappearance of Seattle photographer." To most people, it sounded almost unreal. 3 decades had passed. The skyline was different, the people were different, but the name Emily Carter still carried weight, the missing artist whose face had once been on every lamppost downtown. Detective Maya Ortiz stood outside the precinct that morning, watching reporters flood the sidewalk. For her, it wasn't about headlines. It was about the quiet sense of justice finally catching up after all those years of silence. She had spent nights reading through old reports, the faded notes written by detectives long retired, the heartbreak of parents who refused to stop asking questions. Now, she was the one calling them to tell them it was finally over. Tom and Grace Carter arrived in Seattle the next day. They stood before cameras, holding a framed photo of their daughter taken just a few weeks before she vanished, Emily smiling beside the waterfront, her camera strapped around her neck. Grace's voice trembled but didn't break as she said, "She was found because people refused to forget her. We want to thank every person who never stopped looking." Inside the courthouse, Daniel Larson's first appearance was brief. He shuffled in wearing a gray jumpsuit, his wrists cuffed, his expression unreadable. He declined to enter a plea, his public defender asking for more time to review the case. But even in that brief moment, everyone in the room felt the gravity of it, the quiet photographer who disappeared in 1994, and the man now accused of ending her life. The prosecution built its case meticulously. DNA evidence from Emily's car placed Larson directly in contact with her. The strange notes matched his linguistic patterns, confirmed by a forensic handwriting expert. Old acquaintances testified about his unsettling behavior in the mid-90s, how he often lingered near young women at Pike Place, sometimes muttering about seeing them through the lens. And then there was his chilling statement to police. She saw something she wasn't supposed to. It was enough to charge him with first-degree murder and kidnapping. For months, Seattle followed every development. Reporters revisited the case's history, airing archived footage from 1994, candlelight vigils, missing posters, the desperate searches. Younger residents who hadn't been alive then found themselves drawn into the story, unable to look away from how one night of violence could echo for 30 years. In court, Larson sat silent. He never showed emotion, even when confronted with photos of Emily or her parents' testimony. But the prosecution's timeline was damning. Witnesses placed him near her gallery on multiple occasions. His employment records from the docks proved he was working the week she vanished. And when investigators re-examined his old apartment, preserved through rental archives, they found traces of carpet fibers consistent with those from Emily's jacket. The defense attempted to argue that the DNA evidence was transfer-based, that Larson's contact with Emily might have been innocent. Perhaps she had photographed him, or he'd been near her car in a public lot. But the jury didn't buy it. The probability of such a match being coincidental was astronomically low. After weeks of testimony, the trial reached its breaking point when the prosecution played audio from Larson's final interrogation. He had remained calm through most of it, until Detective Ortiz showed him a photo of Emily's parents standing at the pier with lilies in their hands. That was when his voice cracked, barely audible as he muttered, "I didn't mean for it to happen." He never explained what it was. In July 2024, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Larson showed no reaction. Grace Carter wept quietly, clutching Tom's hand. Detective Ortiz, standing at the back of the room, exhaled for the first time in months. Justice had finally been served, but it came with a weight that no victory could fully lift. Outside, as cameras flashed and reporters swarmed, Tom Carter spoke only once. His words were simple, quiet, and carried the heaviness of decades. "For 30 years, we lived in a question. Now we have an answer. It doesn't bring her back, but it lets us breathe again." That night across Seattle, candles flickered in windows. People who remembered Emily, or had only heard her story through their parents, stood in silence for a moment. The rain returned, soft and steady, tapping against the city's glass towers. Somewhere near Pike Place Market, beneath the neon glow, a small bouquet of white lilies rested at the edge of the pier, the same spot where Emily was last seen walking into the mist 30 years earlier. In the months following Daniel Larson's conviction, Seattle began to heal, not with celebration but with reflection. For 3 decades, Emily Carter's name had lingered like a question in the city's collective memory. Now, at last, there was an answer. Yet closure did not come easily. It rarely does in stories like hers. Tom and Grace Carter returned home to Spokane after the trial, their lives forever divided into 2 timelines, before and after.